held by Vladimir Putin, but also Russian political prisoners. The message was loud and clear. The free world knows that the real criminals are those in the Kremlin who have started the war in Ukraine, not those of us who were imprisoned because we had opposed it. 2 years ago, my wife Evgenia stood here to accept the Václav Havel Prize on my behalf. I learned the news on the staircase of the Basmanny District Court in Moscow when a friend shouted it to me as I was being escorted in handcuffs into a hearing. I have to tell you that was a pretty surreal experience. And although I'm 2 years late, I want to take this opportunity to thank you from the bottom of my heart and to reiterate the message that I sent in a note that my wife read out in this chamber. I was deeply humbled by this prize, but I view it first and foremost as your recognition of all my fellow Russians who had the courage to stand up to Putin's regime and to call out his murderous war in Ukraine in full knowledge of what the price of that stand would be. According to self-admittedly incomplete counts from human rights groups, more than 20,000 people were detained by police across Russia since February of 2022 for anti-war protests. More than 9,000 were subjected to administrative arrests or penalties, just one step away from criminal prosecution. And more than 1,000 have been criminally indicted, tried, or imprisoned for protesting against this war. These protests have taken different forms. In the case of Alexei Gorinov, a Moscow municipal councillor, it was calling for a minute of silence at his council meeting for Ukrainian children killed by Russian bombs. The price was 7 years in prison. In the case of Maria Ponomarenko, a Siberian journalist, it was reporting honestly about the Russian airstrike on a theater in Mariupol that left hundreds of civilians dead. The price was 6 years in prison. In the case of Dmitry Ivanov, a talented young mathematician who was arrested on the day of his final exam at Moscow State University before he could graduate, it was posting on social media about the war crimes committed by Russian forces in Bucha and elsewhere in Ukraine. The price was 8.5 years in prison. And the list goes on. More than 1,300 known political prisoners in Putin's Russia, many more than in the whole of the Soviet Union in its later years. But it's not only the people who are jailed. It is impossible to judge the true state of public opinion in a country that imprisons you for expressing it. But we do sometimes get glimpses into how many Russians actually feel about Putin and about his war. One such glimpse came in February of this year, when, amid the staged circus and the total unanimity of our so-called presidential election, one candidate, actually a former member of this assembly, Boris Nadezhdin, tried to run on an anti-war platform. The public response was unimaginable. That month, almost all the letters I received in prison were about the long lines, hours-long lines, that suddenly appeared in cities and towns across Russia, the lines of people who wanted to sign the nominating petitions to get that anti-war candidate on the ballot. Needless to say, he was barred from running, as opposition candidates in today's Russia invariably are. But that was almost besides the point, because suddenly everyone saw through the lie peddled by Putin's propaganda that all Russians backed his regime, that all Russians supported his war. I'll never forget one letter a young woman sent me from the Black Sea town of Novorossiysk. After describing how she waited for hours in a long line of like-minded people, mostly young people, to sign the nomination papers for the anti-war candidate, she wrote, "I never realized how many of us there are." This is my Russia, the Russia I love, the Russia I call home. Not the Russia of Vladimir Putin, but the Russia of Boris Nemtsov and Alexei Navalny. Not the Russia of murderers and war criminals who are sitting in the Kremlin, but the Russia of decent and good-hearted people who oppose them. Not the archaic, repressive, and belligerent Russia of today, but a hopeful, peaceful, democratic Russia of tomorrow. One day, I know, that Russia will regain its rightful place in the family of European nations, in this chamber, in this palace, in this Council of Europe, that will attain that pan-European dimension its founders had dreamed of. And that will be a very bright day for all of us. Because the best promise of long-term security, stability, and democracy on our continent, the best promise of a Europe that would finally be whole, free, and at peace, lies with a democratic Russia. I believe in this promise with all my heart. I know that many of you do too. Let us work together to make it a reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, dear Vladimir. Dear colleagues, I will now give the floor to representatives of the political groups for 2 minutes each. And first, I will give the floor to Mr. Frank Svabe. No, sorry, it's Suna Versdottir. Suna, sorry. On behalf of the Socialists, Democrats, and Greens.
Dear Vladimir, I'm so happy that you can finally deliver your acceptance speech for your well-earned Václav Havel Prize, for which I had the great honor of nominating you back in 2022. You were imprisoned for speaking your mind, for bravely speaking against war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by the agents of the usurper of your beloved home country, Russia, against your friends and neighbors in Ukraine. You were imprisoned because you returned to Russia after speaking your mind about this horrendous and unjustified war of aggression, despite the pleas of your friends, myself included, not to return because of the obvious danger involved. And I remember what you said to me, that you couldn't ask the Russian people to fight for a free Russia if you weren't willing to be there to do that yourself. And here you are, again a free man, still advocating for the release of other political prisoners, and I want to thank you, in particular, for mentioning Anna Mamatli, another Václav Havel prisoner laureate, not prisoner laureate, well, he is a prisoner laureate, but prize winner laureate, who was indeed, like you, imprisoned when he was awarded the prize 10 years ago, but since then freed, and now again imprisoned on bogus charges amid a continuing crackdown on civil society activists in his home country of Azerbaijan. The charges against him are fabricated, and his prosecution is an apparent retaliation for his criticism of the government and his activism. Dear Vladimir, I have often said that imprisoning people for expressing their opinions is a lethal weapon against democracy. The fear that it instills in any given population to see their critics, their activists, their advocates for freedom imprisoned, or even worse, killed, which sadly applies to too many of Russia's freedom fighters, like Boris Nemtsov, Alexei Navalny, and Sergei Magnitsky. The fear that this instills in the population is immense, and it delivers a message of hopelessness and despair. But dear Vladimir, if imprisoning people for expressing their opinion is a lethal weapon against democracy, freeing political prisoners is a lethal weapon against tyranny. And seeing you here, a free man again, is one big blow to the tyranny of Vladimir Putin. May there be many more.
Thank you, Suna. I give now the floor to the leader of the EPP, Pablo Hispan. Pablo.
Mr. President. Welcome, Vladimir. You are here today to accept the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize awarded to you in 2022. When Eugenia accepted the award on your behalf in that day, she spoke the words you have sent from prison. You were dedicated the prize to all those brave Russians who had spoken out against the war in Ukraine. In interviews you gave to the BBC since your release, you described being taken from your prison cell to a room where you sat under a portrait of Vladimir Putin. You were given pen and paper and instructed to write a confession and a pleading for clemency. You refused to do so, and instead you wrote a message stating that Vladimir Putin was not a legitimate president, that he was conducting an illegal war against Ukraine. Despite 2 poison attempts and a harsh prison sentence, 25 years, much of it in solitary confidence, you managed to win the 2024 Pulitzer Prize for the columns you wrote from your prison cell for the Washington Post. Your social media content since your release has continued to call for a free independent press, to denounce the murder of Alexei Navalny, and to call for the release of other hundreds of thousands, perhaps we will never know how many, being kept illegally in Russian prisons or purely political charges. On the day you release, we witnessed the images of Eugenia and your children in the Oval Office speaking on telephone with you for the first time since your release. You have exhibited the kind of moral courage, resilience, honesty in the face of tyranny, and the innate humanity believed by your soft-spoken voice. On behalf of the EPP Group, I congratulate you and I thank you for your continued work for press freedom, for peace, and for better future of the Russian people. You know that some of us have been tireless defenders of you, as for example, Emmanuel Singeris. And on behalf of the Spanish-speaking countries, I welcome you. You learned Spanish in the years that you were in prison, so you now can read the language of Cervantes, that freedom is the most precious gift that the heaven has given to the human being. You are not only a quixotic dreamer, you are a truly hero of our times. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo. On behalf of the European Conservatives, Olena Komenko.
Honored guests, distinguished colleagues, friends of freedom, Václav Havel was a man who understood the true essence of resistance. He once wrote, "You do not become a dissident just because you decide one day to take up the most unusual career. You are thrown into it by your personal sense of responsibility combined with a complex set of external circumstances." Havel's life and the lives of those honored with this prize teach us that resisting oppression is never a matter of choice, but of a moral duty. Today we honor those who have taken on this heavy burden, including Vladimir Kara-Murza, who despite enduring 2 years of imprisonment under the Russian regime remains unwavering in his position to the unjust and brutal war being waged by Russia against my country, Ukraine. Yet, as Ukrainians, we know that courage alone is not enough. Our struggle today is one for survival. While we appreciate the acts of individuals like Mr. Kara-Murza, we must remind ourselves and words and declarations must be met with actions, tangible efforts that contribute to the end of this aggression. Havel wrote, "None of us are just victims. We are also co-creators of a system that oppresses us." If there is to be a real anti-war movement in Russia, it cannot merely be in opposition to the visible symptoms of violence. It must confront the deeper roots, the imperial policy, the aggression, and the systemic oppression that fuels the war. To the anti-war movements in Russia, we ask, will you actively contribute to the just peace we seek, grounded in international law and guided by Ukraine's peace plan? Will you join us in calling for secondary sanctions that restrict the resources enabling this horrific war? Will you take up the cause of Ukrainian prisoners of war and the civilians illegally detained, advocating for their release? And what will you do to stop killing and deporting Ukrainian children? In the spirit of Václav Havel, we urge you not to speak out, not only to speak out, but also act with conviction. Your movement has the potential to do just that if it commits fully to not only ending the war, but ensuring a future free from imperialistic ambitions. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you, Elena. Mr. Julian Boulay, the leader of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe.
Dear Vladimir, we are so happy to have you back. Welcome back. We are also very relieved to know that other friends of Council of Europe and of our group, the ALDE group, including Oleg Orlov and Ilya Yashin, are free. On behalf of ALDE, and I think of all of us, I also want to praise Yevgenia's unstoppable, tireless commitment fighting for her husband's freedom. You, Yevgenia, became a true example for us and have proved that no matter how terrible the situation of political prisoners may be, their families should not abandon hope or give up the fight. You, Evgenia, have been a constant reminder that we have the duty to support the families of political prisoners. We also have the responsibility to protect Russian dissidents who have found refuge in our Council of Europe member states. We all know that Russian secret services and their agents have long hands and strike our friends even within the relative security zone of the free world. At the same time, colleagues, our joy has a bitter taste too. Too many political prisoners remain behind the bars in both Russia, Azerbaijan, and Belarus, including 2 other Václav Havel Human Rights Prize laureates, Ales Bialyatsky and Maria Kolesnikova. How can we not mention the Ukrainian prisoners of war and civilians kept hostage in Russia? How can we not mention Anar Mammadli, yet another laureate and renowned human rights defender currently detained in Azerbaijan? We must pay tribute to their courage, because you do need a lot of courage to stand up fighting the brutality of an authoritarian regime. Our joy, dear colleagues, has a bitter taste because of the very reason of Vladimir's imprisonment. The horrible Russian war of aggression against Ukraine and the Russian dictatorial, criminal and corrupt government are still there. We know Vladimir will continue his fight, and we should do so. But now, at the end of my intervention, colleagues, today, in this very hemicycle, there are friends of Russian dictatorship who work tirelessly to legitimize it by downplaying the crime of aggression and who push Putin's agenda to undermine European solidarity. Here, we cannot turn a blind eye on Putin's regime, devious crimes both in Ukraine and Russia. It represses the opposition, silences every dissenting voice, and crushes the grassroots of democracy. This is why I want to call upon all present, especially you and everyone who on the extreme sides think that is not necessarily an argument in being on the right side of history, but legitimizing by false peace speeches a dictator, someone who started a war in Ukraine and who has no interest in going back just because of you using a false argument of peace. Please refrain from that and be on the right side of the history. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. On behalf of United European Left, Andrei Hunko.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much indeed, President. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the left group, the European United Left, I would like to warmly congratulate Vladimir Kara-Murza that you're here, that you're with us. And only a few weeks ago, you were released from illegal prison sentence. And it's always a good thing when people, on account of their political activities, on the grounds of what they have had to say, are arrested, but then as a result of external pressure are released, are liberated, which is why we are delighted to see you with us. Who would have thought only 6 months ago that this week here in Strasbourg you would be here on the occasion of the award of the Václav Havel Prize, and that we would be hearing a statement from Vladimir Kara-Murza, and that tomorrow, who would have thought that Julian Assange will be able to speak here in this assembly too. As I say, only 6 months ago that would have been inconceivable. We represent the European United Left group, and perhaps I could draw your attention to Boris Kagalitsky, who is in prison, who is sitting in a Russian jail, and we would like to support his cause. We'd also like to say that we need mediators. Prisoner exchange was thanks to Turkey. I've been very critical of Turkey in the past, but I think Turkey made available its good offices and served as a mediator. So it's thanks to that the prisoner exchange was possible at all. And to conclude, I would like to remind you that you talked about the dream of pan-Europe. Michael Gorbachev was here in 1989, June 89, and talked about the common house of Europe at the time. And irrespective of the way that leads there, I think that is a prospect that we should never lose sight of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrei. Dear colleagues, this assembly sticks to the rules, but in my country, Greece, we sometimes say that the exception makes the rules, and I will make an exception now for exceptional reason and for emotional reasons. I will ask Mr. Emanuele Zingeris to have the floor for 15 seconds because he's a very close friend to Vladimir Kara-Murza, and he had asked me exceptionally to say just a few words. Emanuele, I hope the leaders of the parties will not blame me for this.
Guys, it's an incredible moment of victory, of democracy, and it's not a gift from Kremlin. It's our everyday efforts not to give the democratic world to be shrinking. And I would like to say that we have chance to win. Democratic space led by people like Vladimir Kara-Murza they have chance to win. I would like to say thank you so much for everyone here. Vladimir, can you imagine our session, January session started from you. Everyone were appealing to the governments from his hall in January on the beginning of the session, asking every country to be behind you, behind Russian political prisoners, behind our hope that Russia will come to the terms, remembering Boris Nemtsov and remembering the poor Ukrainians on the field. Thank you for confirming reality of democracy. Not real politics, but democracy will win. Thank you for that. Thank you for your family. Thank you for Zhenya. Thank you for your grandfather. And thank you for your family support to this, your mother in Berlin too. So thank you so much for your support. Thank you.
Dear Vladimir, you may have the floor for a couple of minutes if you want to respond.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much again, Mr. President. I just want to thank all the representatives from the political groups who have spoken. I want to thank in particular Suna Eversdottir for leading the work on liberation of political prisoners, first as a rapporteur on political prisoners in Russia specifically, and now as a general rapporteur on the political prisoners in all Council of Europe member states and beyond, in non-member states in Europe like Russia. And I should also mention that the other Pan-European Parliamentary Assembly, the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE, now has its own special representative on the same issue, on the issue of political prisoners. So now we have two office holders who are dedicated to this most important and most urgent cause, and I hope we can work together going ahead to make sure that many, many others who are still left behind, who still have to wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and attach their bunk to the wall and, you know, walk in that small circle around in a small cell. I hope we can get all the others out too, because it is not acceptable that in the 21st century, in European countries or in any countries for that matter, people are being held in prison with longer terms than murderers or drug dealers simply because they have an opinion that diverges from the opinion of their government. To the honorable representative from Ukraine, from the Conservatives group, I want to say that we hear you very well, and I too am a big believer that deeds are more important than words. And on this matter, I just want to say that the Free Russia Foundation, with which I am honored to be associated and serve as Vice President, is actively engaged in helping to find Ukrainian prisoners of war, but also Ukrainian civilian hostages who are being held in Putin's jails. And out of the 4,000 some people who were exchanged from the Ukrainian side in these past 2.5 years, as part of these regular POW exchanges, 900 plus were found by our organization. So that's the work we're dedicated to, and we will continue going forward with it. And you know, to me this is personal now too, because Ukrainian POWs were my neighbors back in Omsk. We were sitting in the same internal prison, ПКТ, it's called in Russian, помещение камерного типа, internal prison inside the penal colony, including with a very senior military officer from Ukraine, whom I very much hope to see his name one of these days on one of the exchange lists. And finally, I just want to say that don't let anyone ever tell you that, you know, what happens in this chamber, what happens in this assembly is just talk and just, you know, paper and resolutions, and that all of it is meaningless. You know, the cynics and the skeptics who say things like this have been not only proven wrong, but have really been put to shame with that prisoner exchange last month, when 16 human lives were saved from the hell that is Vladimir Putin's modern-day gulag, because this exchange would never have happened without your debates, without your resolutions, without your words, without your solidarity, without your support, because public opinion matters. And this House, this Assembly, has really been leading the way on so many issues that are important to us. For example, this Assembly was the first parliamentary body anywhere in the world. The European Parliament has now followed, but you were the first to officially state that Vladimir Putin is a usurper, that he's not a legitimate president, that he's illegally overstepped the constitutional term limits to remain in power. This was a resolution passed overwhelmingly in this chamber earlier this year. The work that was led by Eric Niels Cross, whom I see here in this chamber. It was this House that led the way in defense and in support of all those thousands of people in Russia who have been imprisoned or persecuted for speaking out against the war in Ukraine, with the resolution and the report that Yusuna led the work on earlier this year. And you have led this House on the issue of political prisoners, and the result of that, the direct result of that, was the liberation of 16 people last month. But you're absolutely right in saying that there's so many others whom we still need to get out. And this is something that I will dedicate all my time and all my efforts to in the coming weeks, in the coming months, and in the coming years. And another issue that I think it is very important to work on together is to lay down a roadmap to prepare ourselves for that day when a free and democratic Russia can regain its place in Europe, in this chamber, in this House. That is going to be in the interests of all of us. That day will come, I have absolutely no doubt, but it is within our strength, it is within our power, it is within our efforts to try to bring this day a little quicker, a little faster, a little closer. So let's work together to make it happen. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, dear Vladimir. Now, colleagues, I invite you all to watch a short video on the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize, by which we recognize and honor the work of thousands of individuals and organizations who share our values and goals, the protection of fundamental freedoms and human dignity. Let the video roll.
10th of May 1990, The President of the Czech and Slovak Federal Republic entered the Assembly Chamber of the Council of Europe. It was an emotional parliamentary assembly that welcomed the former political dissident, the figurehead of the Velvet Revolution, who in 1989 brought an end to the communist regime. In his speech, the philosopher president, an atypical politician, spoke of his years of opposition when dreams took the place of hope.
Nebát snít o zdánlivě nemožném, chceme-li, aby se zdánlivě nemožné stalo skutečností. Bez snění o lepší Evropě nikdy lepší Evropu nevybudujeme.
Following the invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968, which marked the end of the liberalization process of the Prague Spring, Václav Havel remained faithful to his convictions. As chairperson of the Circle of Independent Writers, his commitment led to the banning of his plays. The international community quickly became aware of this dissident. In 1977, Václav Havel co-founded Charter 77, an organization defending human rights in Czechoslovakia. Because of his activities, he was imprisoned on 3 occasions for almost 5 years. In 1989, the crowd spontaneously placed Václav Havel at the head of the Civic Forum, an association uniting opposition movements. He became a key figure in the Velvet Revolution. Almost a quarter of a century later, in March 2013, the prize was launched in Prague to honour what Václav Havel was and what he did. Since then, the prize is awarded each year by the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, in partnership with the Václav Havel Library and the Charter 77 Foundation, to reward outstanding civil society action in the defence of human rights. For the 11th edition of the prize, the 3 candidates shortlisted are Akif Gurbanov, Azerbaijan. The nominee is a human rights defender, political activist, and active member of Azerbaijani civil society. He is the co-founder of the Institute of Democratic Initiative, IDI, and of the Third Republic platform. He was arrested in March 2024 in a wave of arrests targeting journalists and activists in the country. Maria Corina Machado, Venezuela. The nominee is a leading political figure in Venezuela, engaged in denouncing human rights abuses in her country and defending democracy and the rule of law. She is the co-founder of the Venezuelan volunteer civil organization Sumate for civil and political freedom, rights and citizen participation. Babutsa Pataraya, Georgia. The nominee is a leading feminist activist and human rights lawyer in Georgia. She is the director of Sapari, an NGO focusing on women's rights and providing support for victims of violence since 2013. She has worked for over a decade to fight against feminicide, sexual violence against women, and sexual harassment. In 1990, Mr. Havel spoke in Strasbourg of the immense strength embodied by the ideals of the Council of Europe. Referring to the organization's emblem, he said that for him, the 12 stars did not express the idea that the Council of Europe would succeed in building a heaven on earth, as there never would be a heaven on earth.
But,
in my opinion, these 12 stars are a reminder that the world can become a better place
zahledět
if we
do hvězd.
have the courage
Děkuji
to
vám za pozornost.
raise our eyes to the stars.
The Václav Havel Human Rights Prize pays tribute to this distinguished European, and it also pays tribute to all those who, through their determined and tireless work, bring us closer to the ideal of a better world.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to first welcome the jury of the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize who have joined us today, Madame Anne Brasser and Madame Maurice Pasquet, whom you know well, as both have served as presidents of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. Madame Anne Brasser from 2014 to 2016, and Madame Maurice Pasquet from 2018 to 2020. Mr. Nils Muiznieks, Human Rights Commissioner of the Council of Europe from 2012 to 2018, who attended the first Václav Havel Award ceremony in 2013. We also have with us today Mr. Mikhail Zandowski, one of the founders of the Civic Forum, a spokesperson and advisor to President Václav Havel, a renowned diplomat. Mr. Martin Boyard is a professor of medicine specializing in neurology. Following the Velvet Revolution, he entered politics and served as the Minister of Health of the Czech Republic from 1990 to 1992. He's also a member of the steering board of the Charta 77 Foundation. Mr. Martin Butora sends his apologies as he is unfortunately unable to be with us today. These are the members of the jury, but allow me now to welcome among us Mr. Tini Cox, who handed the presidency of the Assembly over to me. Tini, it is a great pleasure and honor to have you back in the hemicycle. You presided over this assembly from 2022 to 2024. In 2022, you gave the prize to Mrs. Evgenia Karamurza, as her husband Vladimir, as I mentioned earlier, the winner of the prize, was in prison. I'm tremendously happy to see them both with us today. Dear colleagues, on behalf of all the members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, I would like to thank our partners from the Václav Havel Library, the Charter 77 Foundation, and of course, His Excellency, the Ambassador, and the Government of Czechia for their commitment and contribution without which the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize could not have come into being. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues, it was in 2007 that the Assembly first awarded a Human Rights Prize to recognize the courage and dedication of human rights defenders. Since 2013, this prize was borne the name of Václav Havel. Over time, this prize should have become a celebration of the triumph of human rights and democracy. It has rather become a reward for the struggle and perseverance in defending the values promoted by the Council of Europe. Since 2013, the year where the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize was awarded for the first time, we have witnessed the illegal annexation of Crimea by the Russian Federation, later followed by the large-scale aggression of Russia against Ukraine, an unprecedented migration crisis since World War II, the tightening of Alexander Lukashenko's regime with political repression forcing nearly 500,000 people into exile. We have also witnessed democratic backsliding in both new and established democratic regimes. Today, 6 out of the 12 winners of the Václav Havel Prize are imprisoned. Ladies and gentlemen, a half of them. The 20 and 23 winner, Mrs. Osman Kavala, imprisoned since 2017. The 2021 winner, Mrs. Maria Kalesnikova, sentenced in 2021 to 11 years of imprisonment. The 2019 winner, Mr. Ilham Tohti, sentenced to life imprisoned in 2014. The 2027 winner, Mr. Murat Arslan, imprisoned since 2016. the 2014 winner, Mr. Anal Mammadli, with whom the Council of Europe has been working with for so many years on election observation and other issues, was once again arrested earlier this year, and remains in pre-trial detention. The 2013 winner, Mr. Ales Bialitsky, was imprisoned twice and currently since 2021. These individuals committed only one crime. They simply wanted to make their voices heard, to share the vision of a just and free society. Instead, their voices were silenced. They were imprisoned and deprived of contact with their loved ones. I call on the authorities to grant their immediate release along with all other political prisoners, and I hope to be able to welcome them one day in this hemicycle, as we did today with Vladimir Kara-Murza. The picture I have drawn might seem bleak and hopeless, but hope still exists. I see beside me Mr. Kara-Murza, the 2022 winner, who is now free and ready to continue his commitment, as he said just minutes before. Although the Assembly could not prevent actions driven by selfish ambitions, it has managed to respond. The register of damage, operational since this year, the work on the Tribunal on the Crime of Aggression, and the plans for the reconstruction of Ukraine are just some initiatives that demonstrate the Council of Europe commitment to stand alongside those who risk their lives and the lives of their beloved ones to make our societies more democratic, more just. I'm particularly glad that this recognition of courage has a universal vocation, as many of our nominated candidates represent other continents, illustrating that the thirst for freedom and democratic values is universal to humanity. Dear friends, the shortlisted candidates this year for the Václav Havel Prize, as you have already seen on the screen, are Akif Gurbanov from Azerbaijan. Mr. Gurbanov is a human rights defender, political activist, and active member of Azerbaijani civil society. He is the co-founder of the Institute of Democratic Initiative and the Third Republic platform, and he was arrested in March 2024 in a wave of arrests targeting journalists and activists in the country, and remain in detention. Maria Corina Machado from Venezuela. Mrs. Machado is a leading political figure in Venezuela, engaged in denouncing human rights abuses in her country and defending democracy and the rule of law. She is the co-founder of the Venezuelan volunteer civil organization Sumate for civil and political freedom and citizen participation. Mrs. Babucha Pataraya from Georgia. Mrs. Pataraya is a leading feminist activist and human rights lawyer in Georgia. She is the director of Sapari, an NGO focusing on women's rights and providing support for victims of violence since 2013. She has worked for over a decade to fight against femicide, sexual violence against women, and sexual harassment. I would like to warmly welcome the candidates who have joined us today, either in person or online. I don't know if Mrs. Machado is with us until now. We have tried to, yes, I want to welcome Mrs. Machado. I would like also to thank I would also like to thank Mrs. Sakhla Humbatova from Gurbanov's lawyer and Mrs. Anna Corina Machado, who is with us today in the hemicycle. Mrs. Machado, I deeply regret that you are not able to travel to Strasbourg and be with us today, but you colleagues have to know already, that most of you know it already, that there are multiple threats on Mrs. Machado. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is alongside the members of the jury, our partners from the Václav Havel Library and Charter 77, and the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, that I finally have the immense honor, pleasure, and privilege of announcing the name of the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize laureate for 20 and 22. The prize is awarded to Mrs. Maria Corina Machado from Venezuela. And I would like to ask her daughter to come and receive the diploma. I would like to invite the two finalists among the three to come on the floor, and I will give you your diploma.
It is my honor to be chosen as finalist together with such a distinguished activists, and real privilege to be able to attend this event physically. I would like to use this opportunity and talk about disturbing rise of authoritarianism in my homeland, Georgia. A Russian oligarch, Bidzina Ivanishvili, has captured the state for years, and now he tries to change the entire foreign trajectory of the country from Europe to Russia. The oligarch single-handedly controls state's parliament, government, courts, most popular TV channel, and now, with the adoption of Russian-style foreign influence legislation, he's about to shut down all the watchdog non-governmental organizations and independent media. For the last 2 years, members of civil society have been under constant threats, verbal and sometimes physical attacks. Propaganda and smear campaigns target every actor, including artists, writers, scientists, who are critical and vocal about rising authoritarianism. Anti-gender, far-right, and violent groups are staying unpunished. The only hope relies with the upcoming elections on 26th of October. I know the Georgian people has made its decision to get rid of Ivanishvili, but we had to protect freedom and fairness of the elections and its outcomes. Thus, the international society should stay vigilant to safeguard the will of the Georgian people and its manifestation. A pro-European and democratic future is important not only for Georgia or Caucasus, but for the entire world, as the struggle demonstrates a fight between democracy and authoritarianism, between truth and the propaganda. So let good prevail over the evil.
President. I'm speaking on behalf of Akif Kurbanov, who is in jail, as it was said, since March this year. It is sad that he cannot attend this event to be here in person, but I'm proud to be his lawyer, and his absence, the fact of his absence is a dark reflection of the ongoing political repression in Azerbaijan. 11 years ago, Akif Kurbanov founded the Institute for Democratic Initiatives, the organization which has trained dozens of journalists and human rights defenders. Now, 4 employees of the organization are in prison. Besides, Akif Kurbanov is one of the founders of media outlet Toplum TV, which was shut down during the latest crackdown, and the legal representative and journalist of Toplum TV is also in jail now. And apart from this, Akif Kurbanov is a co-founder of a newly created political movement, Third Republic Platform, another founding member of which was also arrested in March. I have to be brief, so I want just to quote just a small part of his message. he writes from the prison. I am absolutely honored to be considered for this award, as it signifies acknowledgement for my organization's contribution to civil society and serves as encouragement for all the courageous individuals advocating for human rights and democracy in Azerbaijan. I'm deeply grateful for this opportunity and extend my best wishes to my fellow nominees. Together, let's continue to strive for positive change and make a lasting impact in our community. I express my special thanks to the organizations that nominated me: Freedom Now, People in Need, Norwegian Helsinki Committee, Human Rights Watch, and International Partnership for Human Rights. And the recognition from this Parliamentary Assembly is particularly important as many voices are being silenced in Azerbaijan right now. Since November 2023, Azerbaijan has seen an unprecedented escalation of political repression, targeting civil society organizations, media, journalists, human rights defenders, activists, politicians, and so on. Two media outlets, Abzas and Toplum TV, were shut down. And the current crackdown is more than a series of isolated actions. It's a systematic campaign to silence every critical voice. So the charge against Azerbaijan civil society stems from a simple demand for basic freedoms and accountability. So we ask you for your continuous support and solidarity for the brave men and women who are in jail now in Azerbaijan, and others who continue to fight for human rights despite the risks. We need your solidarity now more than ever. Thank you.
I will now call Madame Machado to address our assembly online. Congratulations.
I'd like to thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm very honored. I would like to thank the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and its President, Theodoros Rosopoulos, the Václav Havel Library, the Charter 77 Foundation, and the jury of this prize for honoring me with this year's Václav Havel Human Rights Prize. I also want to express my recognition to Rafik Urbanov and Baruch Zapata-Traya. I would also like to thank the Human Rights Committee of Liberal International for nominating me, and for all those who supported this nomination. I am deeply moved, honored, and grateful. And also I'm the first Latin American to win this distinction. I want to especially acknowledge Vladimir Karamurza and recognize his courage and his testimony to fight for a free Russia. I'd also like to thank my daughter, Ana Corina, for being there on my behalf and for her constant support to me, as well as my other two sons, Ricardo and Enrique. The significance of this award is immense, not only for me, but above all, for all those that fight together today for the cause of freedom in Venezuela. The ethical and political legacy of Václav Havel shines brightly for anyone who studies it, but it reaches its full splendor when we're called upon to put it into practice. For this reason, I want to dedicate recognition to the millions of Venezuelans who every day embody Havel's values and ideas, thousands of them today in prison or persecuted. Today, I want to convey how Havel's legacy has become profoundly relevant to us Venezuelans, given the immense challenges we have faced over the last 25 years to regain our freedom. Amid the enormous difficulties countries enduring, it almost feels like a dream today to recall that Venezuela was the most solid democracy in Latin America during the 80s, a country that used its diplomacy and resources to help its neighbors overcome dictatorships and civil wars, supported them in transitions to democracy. It was still the time of the Cold War in a very different part of the world, in a country like Czechoslovakia, a movement called Charter 77 emerged to fight against a different kind of autocratic regime. In Havel's words, Charter 77 was an attempt by a group of courageous and upright citizens to build a true parallel polis seeking to escape the totalitarian lie. What motivated these brave pioneers was not an ambition for power. It wasn't a desire to carve out a space for themselves within the existing political system. It was simply the rejection of the regime's lies, which permeated every aspect of daily life. It was a longing to live in a world where words once again served to tell the truth. The goal was none other than to live in the truth. As Havel himself pointed out, only those who refuse to sacrifice their human identity to politics can arrive at this concept. Havel understood that there could be no political solution to a totalitarian regime like that unless first and foremost its effects on daily life were neutralized. Life had to cease being an empty pretense driven by fear. In his own words, people want to hear that true decency and courage make sense, that something must be risked in the struggle against dirty tricks. They want to know they are not alone, forgotten, written off. I have kept these words written in a small paper, in a small piece of paper on my desk for years, and I've strived to live by them every day since. Following his mentor, Jan Patoka, Havel became the principal architect of a powerful idea that emerged during the harsh struggles against Soviet totalitarianism. This idea, which has inspired so many around the world and today forms the backbone of the citizen movement gaining momentum and growing in Venezuela, is that the foundation of any desirable political reality is the truth. That is why Havel's words, "It is my responsibility to emphasize again and again the moral origin of all genuine politics, to stress the significance of moral values and standards in all spheres of social life, including economics, and to explain that if we don't try within ourselves to discover or rediscover or cultivate what I call higher responsibility, things will turn out very badly indeed for our country." These words have resonated in my mind for many years. During my solitary journey, crossing deserts and swimming many times against the current. The human cost that these brave Czechoslovak citizens had to live in the truth was without a doubt very high. Some paid with their lives, but in the end, they prevailed. And believe me, in today's world, no one understands their struggle better than we Venezuelans, who are compelled to make similar sacrifices for our own freedom. The kind of autocracy we Venezuelans face is also sustained by the eternal pretense of forcing us to live in the lie. Just as if it was under the Soviet Empire, terror aims to reduce people's daily lives to a mere fiction, a cynical, scandalous fiction, where words are used solely to obscure reality and prevent us from exposing it, or worse, to make us doubt the truth itself. Am I the crazy one? Did what I know happen not actually happen? But in the light of Havel's philosophical, ethical, and political legacy, we Venezuelans have identified the root of the problem in defending the dictatorship, defeating the dictatorship, adhering to our core values and holding the truth as our banner. I would like to very briefly summarize these years of struggle and democratic resistance. Chavismo came to power 25 years ago, co-opting all branches of public authority, destroying our institutions, breaking the economy, stealing our reserves, are forcing over 8 million Venezuelans to flee the country. This is over one quarter of our society. This is equivalent if nearly 21 million people would flee Germany, or more than 2.7 would flee the Czech Republic. Over 25 years, we have fought by every means possible: large protests, national strikes and shutdowns, external diplomatic pressure, and more than 30 elections, almost all of which were scandalously fraudulent. In January 2023, Venezuela appeared sad, dim, and hopeless. We decided to spark a great awakening. We had to tear down the barriers that Chavismo had erected between us for 25 years, dividing us into rich and poor, white and black, left and right, those of us that are still here and those who have to leave our country. We built town by town and house by house a movement of redemption for our liberation. Without access to media, without money, and under fierce persecution, we traveled across all of Venezuela, and we successfully mobilized the country to hold primary elections to elect a new leadership to confront Nicolás Maduro in this year's presidential election. So many times I've heard people say that it was impossible. It was impossible to organize these elections without the regime's participation, that it was impossible for people to turn out bravely and vote, that it was impossible to unite our country. But we did it. And on October 22nd, 2023, nearly 3 million Venezuelans participated in the most powerful and defiant act of civic protest. With this legitimacy and strength, we embark on the path to the presidential election. Although I won the primaries, the regime forcibly prevented me from participating as a candidate. We managed to have a decent and courageous man, Edmundo González Urrutia, take on the significant responsibility of running. We built a formidable platform, and on July 28th, over 1 million volunteers spread across the country to defend our votes and collect the tally sheets which serve as the proof of our victory. In less than 24 hours, we successfully collected, digitalized, and published 84% of the official tally sheets issued by the voting machines, demonstrating to the world the victory of Democrats over the dictatorship. In response to this resounding defeat, the regime has reacted brutally. Thousands of my fellow citizens, including women and children, have been detained and tortured. Hundreds of fellow colleagues have been arrested, mistreated, they have to sought asylum, or they have to gone into exile. Our elected president, Edmundo González Urrutia, has been forced into exile in Spain. Today, our struggle continues because the truth persists until it prevails. Amid my forced shelter due to regime's persecution, I find solace in repeatedly reading Havel's, whom I paraphrase when recalling one of his letters to Olga, in which he said, he was where he should be and had not strayed from himself. I know that I am in the right place at the right moment, steadfast in my convictions. That is why I have decided to continue fighting alongside the Venezuelan people. I am convinced, and it is the right thing to do. That is my role, and it's why they chose me as their leader for this stage of the struggle. The truth is harsh for us Venezuelans at this moment, but since we place it at the center of our actions, the dictatorship has begun its inevitable fall. It is a just struggle. It is an ethical struggle for the truth. It is an existential struggle for life. It is a spiritual struggle for the good. In the depth of my being, I hold fast to Havel's lessons, to which I'm committed till the end, hasta el final. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Asado. Dear colleagues, we need 2 more minutes. I would like to call now to the rostrum the Secretary General, the Deputy Secretary General, the Secretary General of the Assembly, the leaders of the parties, the jury, Tini Cox, our previous president, of course, the finalist and the winner, the representative of the winner, and Vladimir with Evgenia for a photo opportunity. Please come close.